And today I am going to introduce the Influencing Decision-Making panel. We have Jenny O'Brien. For the past 12 or so years, Jenny and I have had a mentor relationship. It's been so good that the other night she said to me, now that you've mentored me, can I mentor you? Yes, Jenny, you can mentor me. But Jenny is the Chief Compliance Officer for UnitedHealthcare. We also have Roy Snell. Roy and I have worked together since about 1996 from my days at Penn. We helped build the HCCA and certainly the SCCE. Liza, do we have that pig joke? Do you know the one we always tell? No? Okay. Well, every year Roy tells a pig joke, and it's usually about me. But this year, I wanted to tell it about him, and I can't remember the joke, so there you go. But anyway, Roy, I think, has proven through all of his years of service to be one of the foremost experts on association management. So please join me in welcoming Jenny and Roy to the stage.
Thank you, Odell.
Thanks, man.
Go ahead.
Odell forgot to mention one thing, that I'm a former compliance officer, but that I'm okay now. And I feel compelled to tell a story to lighten the mood a little bit. And I told Jenny before I came up here, I'm going to tell a story to lighten the mood a little bit. And she says, not the pig story. And I said, no, the only other one I know. And that's the one about Odell, ironically. Odell's son, whose name is Trevor, who plays for the Rough Riders in Saskatchewan. You're a good father. You know your son's name. You know what football team he plays for. Well, when Trevor was about five, I happened to call Odell, and Trevor answered the phone. He says, hello. I said, your father there? Yes. Can I speak to him? No. Well, why? He's busy. I said, is your mother there? Yes. Can I speak to her? No. Well, why? She's busy. I said, are there any other adults there I could speak to? He says, yes. I said, who? He says, the police. I said, could I speak to them? By now I'm getting annoyed. He says, no. I said, why? They're busy. I said, could you please tell me what all these people are doing? He says, yeah, they're looking for me. Jenny and I are going to talk about something that we think is a real key element to the role of the compliance professional. And I've been involved in this organization, as Odell was mentioning, for about 18 years. I've had a lot of conversations. I've talked to thousands of people. I spend 14 hours a day here listening to stories. I've been doing this for 18 years, emails, phone calls, and I tend to ask very unique questions. If you've talked about everything for so long, you start asking questions that are a little peculiar sounding maybe. One is why are we here? I think it's an important question about why we're here. We need to understand what they failed to do, those who came before us, that caused this profession to be created, relatively speaking, out of nowhere. If we can understand what it is that happened that caused this country and many other countries to implement compliance programs and hire compliance officers, then we can understand the key to our jobs, and that's important. And I think if I asked everybody here, what is it that we have to do differently that those who came before us did not do, I would get a lot of different answers. If you look at our agenda of this program, you're going to get a lot of different answers. It's an indicator of what we're learning. What do we think is important? One could argue the 7 elements of a compliance program. But auditing has been around for a long time. education, policies, procedures, monitoring, all the elements, investigations, the rule of law, legal analysis, all these things have been around for a long time. I don't think those things are necessarily I don't think those things are necessarily is what failed. I don't think that's necessarily why we're here, although we run compliance programs and we do it a little better than they did in the past. And maybe we have more resources. I still don't think that's a problem. And I think I can clarify that by asking the question of what happened at Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, HealthSouth, Penn State University. It wasn't that they didn't find the problems. I don't think we have a problem in this country finding problems. I think we have a problem in this country fixing problems. In these companies and many others, a half a dozen or more people knew about the problem for years. In some cases, they knew about the problem for 10 years. And I know it's easy to point fingers. We have a sea of people in this country pointing fingers. I think some of the people in the room were actually ethical people that lacked a skill that they needed to fix the problem. They lacked a skill to make the right decision. They lacked influence. They lacked the ability to convince the people in the room to make the right decision. I think we're here. I think compliance programs are here primarily because the people who came before us failed to finish. They failed to influence. If there had been somebody in the room in the early days of the discovery of the problem, they might have fixed it before things got so much worse and so many more people were hurt. And I'm going to comment this one more way before Jenny starts to talk about a structured approach to studying and understanding influence. I've met a lot of compliance professionals. I've talked to thousands. I've pondered, what makes a great compliance professional? Is it because they know how to audit? Is it because they have a law background? Is it because they know how to do risk assessments? Again, and consistent with my argument previously, I don't think it's any of those. I think it's their ability to influence others, to get a better budget, to have more time for education, to fix the problem we just found. And there's a handful of people that I think come to the absolute top of the class in terms of their ability to influence others. And one of them is my co-presenter today, Jenny. And she's going to share with you now a strategy that she and Kim Otte from Mayo Clinic put together to explain the various elements of an effective influencer.
Great. Well, thank you, Roy. It is a bit humbling to be up here and talking to this whole group about influencing. One of the things I enjoy most of coming to the conference, besides the sessions, is sitting down and networking with various people and hearing the journey of how each of us came to our roles. Some it was intentional and applied and wanted to get into compliance. Others of us came from it not really knowing what we were getting into and what was the role of a compliance professional. My journey started in 2001 when I received a phone call. I was at the Attorney General's office in Minnesota, and I received a phone call, and a former colleague of mine said, you should talk to the compliance officer at the hospital system. They're looking for a director of compliance. And I thought, I really don't know much about that, but it's never a waste of time to go and have a conversation. And, I might learn something. So I went to this lunch and I listened to this individual. Some of you may know him, David Orbach. And he was talking about it and had all this passion around the role. And he finished. And I said, that was all very interesting. But until we got here today, I had never heard of 7 elements of a compliance program. I think you can probably find somebody more experienced or that has some experience. And he stopped and he said, Jenny, I can teach you the 7 elements of a compliance program. I need to bring someone into this team that can, and he used these words, influence. He said, I need to bring someone in who has a courage of conviction. I need to bring someone in who is strategic, creative, innovative. I need to bring someone in who's objective and level-headed. So as I listened to that part of the conversation, I suddenly thought, wow, I'm intrigued. This sounds really interesting. And I took a leap of faith and went and did that job. And 13 years later, I'm standing here, still continuing the journey, still evolving what my role is as a compliance officer, still fighting the good fight to be effective in this role and to influence. And as I bring people into my team, I have that same conversation. I think a lot of it is about what is the right skill set to bring into our teams. So we're going to go through, instead of focusing on, we need to focus on the 7 elements of the program, but focusing on the 7 elements of influence. And as you look at these buckets, you could rename them. You could, shift some names in and move them around. But I think by the time Roy and I finish talking about each of these bubbles and going through some of the experiences we've had with these, I hope we'll hit on some of them. And if we haven't, this is a conversation that keeps on going, and that where we can learn from each other and say, did you think about trying this? Because we have really, really hard jobs. Our jobs are, for many of us, a bit isolating of the work we're trying to do. So the more we can tap into each other and share different ideas to help us be more effective in influencing, the more effective we can all be in our roles. So let's start with collaboration. Know the business is the first bullet up there. When I came into my current job, one of the areas I really hadn't had any experience in was working with chief sales officers. How many here have chief sales officers, right? A number, it is one of, my husband's a salesperson, and so I thought, great, I know how salespeople think. I mean, his 2 favorite things to tell my 2 boys are, act like you've been there and say it with conviction, right? And so as I'm working with my chief sales officer, I'm keeping this in mind. But about 2 to 3 months into the relationship and into the job, I thought, I am not effective with him. He's respecting me. He's saying all the right things, but he's not buying into this yet. So what I did was back off. And I thought, what do I need to do to be more effective? And I realized I had not taken the time to learn the business, to learn what he did. So I went on sales calls. I took all the onboard training for all the products and really took the time to learn what their job was. And then I waited. I waited for an issue to come up, which it did. They always do. And when that issue came up, I came in at it in a whole different direction. And he could tell. He knew I suddenly knew the business. Rather than think I had the answers to the questions, I asked a lot more questions. And when we finished that, he sat down and said, Jenny, you were really valuable to helping us solve this situation. Thank you. And so one of the things, as we look at knowing the business, I think that's an important thing for us to do is really make sure we can walk in the shoes of the business leaders that we're serving. Another thing is assume positive intent. When we look around and we work with our business leaders and we're getting pushback or barriers, sometimes we make assumptions on what those might be. I try to turn it around the other way and assume positive intent. We all have very hard jobs for our organizations. I don't care if you're the CFO, you're the CIO, you're the chief sales officer, chief marketing officer, whatever your role is, we all have really high deliverables that we need to do for the organization and a lot of pressures from the market to accomplish those. So it's to understanding, again, where they're coming from and what their challenges are rather than me thinking, what are my challenges and what do I need to get done, is something that I focus on in working with my business leaders. And then finally, my favorite quote as a compliance officer, and I found this about 7 or 8 years ago, is let the other person have your way. And that really fits into what Roy was just talking about with influence. Is, if you're, again, it goes to skill set. I thoroughly enjoy the challenge of moving the organization or my executive team or my sales officer, somebody on my team, to a different place that they need to get to and figuring out a creative and innovative way to get there. It's not all about, for a compliance officer, if it's all about getting the credit and saying, from the organization, of how we accomplish something and saying, gosh, we wouldn't have done it except for the chief compliance officer. How I look at it is the business has to own it. If we want the business to be responsible for compliance, then when we do have those successes, I want the business owner of that area to be standing up there with the success, and I'm standing behind. And one of the biggest, best feelings I have in a meeting is when I hear one of the the leaders around the table saying what I said to them in their office 2 months ago. Only it's coming from their mouths, and they're the ones that are telling the executive team or the organization how we have to move on. It's not coming from the compliance officer. Roy, do you want to take us into the next?
Relationships is one of the other 7 elements of influence. And the key is building strategic relationships, building trust. And as Jenny has taught me as we prep for this thing, and we actually did this for Siemens down in Florida, she actually asks the people in her compliance department to invest their time to go find people in the organizations that they want to build strategic relationships with, and take time to do nothing more than to get to know them and build those relationships. And I've got a little story to go with this. How many people have ever read an article I've written? I have to write 30 a year. People ask, how can you get so many ideas? And I said, I write what I'm aggravated about, and luckily I get aggravated a lot. And people who read what I write also understand I'm very passionate and defensive of the profession. A little manic, actually. I don't drink the Kool-Aid, I inject the Kool-Aid. And I got someone who I think believes that the minute she told me her problem, I was going to come to her aid. And she called up and she said, Roy, and by the way, the key relationships I think we all have is with audit, legal, HR, risk. We should have more relations with communications. But she was having trouble with audit at the time. The story could be applied to anyone. She says, they're taking over my stuff. I got a turf issue going on here. And she expected me to say, yeah, boy, that's horrible, and I'm going to give you some ideas how to get those people out of your area. But instead I said, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I said, the reason why I can't help you is that when I was a compliance officer and somebody came to me and said, I want to do your job for you, I said, that would be okay. And they're just terms and conditions for you doing my job. And I don't mean to, we got to be respectful, and audit has their role, but sometimes they audit things that aren't necessarily compliance related, or people, the vendors double billing us or things. That's not really a compliance issue. But when they go do the compliance audits, and they want to do compliance audits that I think I should be doing, and I'm just like, knock yourself out. I'd rather have you do it than go ask for more people. I just said the terms and conditions. This has to be a strategic partnership here. We just have to agree upon the methodology that this will, how it'll occur. And luckily for us, the auditors are tremendous at their skill. There's just not a lot of debate about doing an effective audit. Where the second term that I would ask for is that, or condition, is that you have to finish. And if you won't finish, I will finish for you. In other words, if you find a few problems, we've got to fix them. You can't just say, not my job, or they wouldn't listen to me, I tried and they wouldn't listen. We have a definition of our role is that we never give up and that we finish. So as far as I'm concerned, these are some of the most important relationships. It's a tremendous part of influence in your organization, is to try and get all these people, frankly, to help be a part of the solution, and get these effective compliance programs implemented. Jenny?
Thank you. So when the next section we're going to talk about is communication. And this is an area that I continue to really have to work on daily, especially being active listening. I'm someone who likes to jump in and join a conversation and share what my experiences are. But I really have to sit back and make sure that I am an active listener. And when that happens, I become a much more effective communicator. When I was right out of college, I was fortunate enough to have a job. I was a journalism major before I went to law school. And my first job out of college was a researcher writer for the state Senate. And so I was assigned 5 different senators, and one was I grew up in rural Minnesota, so they assigned me one from rural Minnesota because they knew that I was, familiar with the type of audience I had there. I had a suburban senator, a metro, one in Minneapolis area, and then up on the northern, we call it the Iron Range, the North Shore. That was such a great training ground for the work that I'm doing now. When I would write articles or speeches for each of these individuals, I would have to change the way I wrote, the tone I wrote, the message that I did in a way that fit that part of the state. And one was for a weekly paper, one was for a suburban paper, one was for the daily paper. And so as I look at communication as it's message giving and message receiving, to really focus as I look around whoever the key stakeholders are at the table, and I have to change to communicate to them how they need to be communicated to, not how I think or what I think they want to hear. And so when I meet with the CFO, and I have to understand what their concerns are and talk in a way that a CFO understands. When I was on the hospital provider side, I had to talk differently to the chief medical officer or the physicians or to a nurse or now to my chief sales officer or some of the upline, the telesales people. It's my job to change my message in a way that fits into their world. And then one of the most important things, as Adele said, he has been my mentor for years. And I was at one of these conferences, and he was on a panel, and someone asked a question of, how do you become an effective compliance officer? What makes you, when you're sitting at that executive table, to be part of and contributing to the greater part of the organization? And he said 2 words, and these are 2 words that I have kept in the back of my mind probably daily. And it is be relevant. Be relevant in every interaction. And sometimes being relevant means speaking up and having the courage to speak up. And there was a situation about 4 years ago where I was at the table with our CEO of our organization. And we had gone into this meeting talking about what we were going to, it was one of those really tough conversations. And everyone had their parts of what they were going to say. Well, one of the key things that one of our business leaders were supposed to bring up and say, which was really the crux of the conversation, he let it slide. And so our CEO said, okay, well, is that it? And people started getting up. And those 2 words of be relevant came into the back of my mind, and I was like, this is what he was talking about. So I said, hold it, we're not quite finished yet. There's one issue we haven't taken care of that was really at the top of this agenda. And I proceeded to put the issue out. Well, the CEO slapped the table and said, what is going on? And said, you in my office, you in my office, you in my office, and took 3 of the business leaders into the office. And I sat at the table and I thought, uh-oh, what just happened? What just happened was the work we'd been avoiding, the conversations we had been avoiding, those conversations took place in that. And I got a call later that day from the CEO who said, thank you for saying what you did at the table. This is why we haven't been getting something done. You need to continue to speak up like that in meetings. So that's be relevant, right? Other times be relevant means don't say anything. We can answer lots of questions. We know a lot. People are going to ask us a lot of questions because in our work, we get across the entire business. But I spend more time not saying something, and this is how you get back to that active listening, right? Because other people can say it, and people don't need to hear something 3 or 4 times. So the be relevant, as I look at it, goes both ways of knowing when to speak up and also knowing when to sit back. The other thing I just want to mention is how important, and Roy talked about this in relationships, we talked about collaboration. The key to, I think, our success around the organization is developing a rapport. And when you develop a rapport with people, that moves your relationship into a trust. And that takes time. As Roy said, I have people on my team, as part of their professional goals for the year, they have to meet with somebody monthly. And we are an organization of 120,000 people. It has to be somebody outside of our department. And so we're a real virtual organization. It cannot be via email. It has to be either teleconference, in-person meeting, or pick up the phone and have a conversation. And so just think about that, 12 interactions a year that wouldn't have normally happened. And that's where you get to developing that rapport, getting to that trust. So when that issue comes up that is a little more intense, any issues we bring to the organization are the result of process breakdowns, right? Something broke down in operations, so we're not the deliverer of the greatest news. And so I have found it's been a great development tool for my team. I do the same thing, is to reach out, develop those relationships up, down, and across the organization. And it's really helped us become better ambassadors for the organization. And more people then are willing to pick up the phone and call us when they have questions or issues.
I don't know if Odell mentioned this earlier, I forget, but both Odell and Jenny are past presidents, which essentially they're past bosses of mine. And they chair the board, and they give me advice. And both of them have given me the same advice that Jenny just talked about. Roy, be relevant. Don't talk. And by the way, I'm a little disappointed that both of you mentioned don't tell the pig story. I think we need a Twitter revolt calling for the pig story. Negotiation. This is a fun one. It happens to do with the board also. We've had a couple of people on our board over the years. First one is Greg Miller. Most recently is Dan Roach, who are phenomenal negotiators. They're the kind of people who sit in a room and redefine the win for everybody. They compromise, and they leverage ideas, really. What they do, I can't help but sit in a debate and listen and think, what am I going to say next? What are they saying that's wrong? Greg Miller and Dan Roach can't be doing that. There's no way they could be spending their time on that, because where they come up with these ideas, I don't know, but they had to have focused only on one thing. What is it that both sides want? Neither one of them talked for a while, actually being relevant. They're listening and not talking. And they wait and wait and wait. And one other thing they do is they kind of wait till the air is out of the balloon, the room is kind of worn out, and they listen to what people want, and then they think of something else they could give them. Especially Dan does this. Unbelievable. He doesn't think about how to win over whatever side is not the side he's preferring. He's trying to think about, well, you ask for this, how can you actually get more? You've asked for this, how can you actually get more? What more could you be asking for? I've studied it a lot and thought about it a lot because I can't do it well. When they do it, it seems impossible. When I think about it, it seems, well, if you just simply, Roy, if you would just stop talking and listen and focus on this, maybe you could come up with solutions like these guys do. I have yet to do it, but I'm working on it. And then when the room is just right, everybody's kind of wore out. They haven't battled one side or the other, so they seem a little bit neutral. They throw an idea out on the table that seems like both sides get more. And of course, whatever side that he was secretly on before he threw this idea out gets more. He wins, they win. It's a tremendous strategy. I wish I could use more. I think we need to use more in our efforts to influence others. We're sitting in the room. There's folks saying you can't. People in the room saying we must. And if we could consider our role as compliance professional, not as for or against anything, not as prosecution or defense, but more like a mediator, like Dan Roach and Miller, Greg Miller, as the person who sits and thinks and does what Jenny says, go figure out what they do, go figure out their job, study them, learn, listen to what they need, add a little bit more, throw the idea on the table, and be great influencers. Now, Jenny will talk about one more of the 7 elements.
Yeah, so one of the things, when I shared the beginning of my story of an important passion or skill or trait you had to have was to be strategic, creative, innovative. And at that time, I thought, are you kidding me? Compliance? You know, how can compliance be seen in that type of vein? And what has happened, what Roy was just talking about, and the work that we're talking here is why we need to be so creative, strategic, and so innovative. And one of the things that is just critical is making sure we have credibility with our organization and what we're doing. And by that we know the business, that we're trusted, we're dependable, that we're patient. We have to be very patient and disciplined in our approaches. And that's really hard to do as we try to move forward some of these projects. The faster we push, like what I did with the chief sales officer, I was pushing too hard. I was pushing where there wasn't urgency, and I realized to stop, pull back, and rethink and come at it with a different strategy. One of the important things as we look at maintaining our credibility is really to define our scope and accountabilities of the work and what our role is. I've been doing this job for a number of years and in a couple of different organizations, and it always amazes me that the organization doesn't quite know what the job is, which is a great opportunity for us to define that role. It's also it could be a potential hazard for us. If you don't have in your own mind what that scope of that role is, and then the role will expand to way beyond what it should, which isn't good for us, and it's not good for the organization. An example of this is we are known as problem solvers for the organization, right? People come to our departments because something's broken. They're not getting answers from where they've gone to. There's a business leader who they maybe have gone to that is either ignoring them or it's not a priority. It's not at the top of their list of what to do. So it ends up in our department. We have to be very careful when things come into our department to figure out what is our scope, what is our accountability to help resolve this issue. When I get an issue, I go to my CEO and I've told him, for every issue that comes to this team, there should be a business owner. And if there's not a business owner, we have to find it. Because what happens when there's not that business owner, it becomes a compliance issue. And then people want compliance. Can you just take care of that issue and make sure it gets fixed? So before, I will help facilitate the issue and help make sure it gets remediated and fixed. But what I do is come to the senior table and say, who owns this? And either we have a gap, and we don't have someone owning it, so we need to get someone to own it. 5 people own it, so therefore no one owns it. And then, as I've told the CEO, of these 5, one of you 5 has to take it so that when there's an issue that comes and reports on it, or if I have my compliance oversight committee, I don't want 5 people reporting on it. Which of you 5 is going to take this issue? That has made such a big difference in helping define the scope of and accountabilities for my role. If you don't do that, I always picture we get all these issues thrown on our shoulders, and you just start feeling, how many people feel weighed down more and more and more, and you're lower and lower? My job is to lift it off my shoulder, take it with them. I say I facilitate effective handoffs. Sometimes it takes me 6 months to effectively hand something off, maybe even a year, but I will hand that issue off. I will help set up that first meeting. I will go to that meeting, and then I will even do the agenda, but that business owner will lead that meeting. And by the time I get a little farther down, pretty soon they're owning the whole process. And then I step back and can step out. If we don't step away and do that type of facilitation and handoff of the issue, it will become ours. Our departments will become bigger and bigger, and we will lose the ability to focus on the core functions of what we're there to support the organization and the work that we're there to do. Demonstrator value. It's a PR campaign. We are, in my company, a non-revenue function of the organization. So when administrative costs come and different things, we are always explaining, as are other departments in our organization, I don't care, no one's immune from this, is what is your value to the organization? And so I am an ambassador. I do a PR campaign. Even if I don't have something to report at a board meeting, I make sure I'm on the agenda, and I share then a success story, or I bring in one of my business leaders to show this is how they responded, this is what they did. On the other side, if I'm not getting it, I bring them in, and they know they have to come in to say why it's not getting done. But always thinking about how do we demonstrate value to up, down, and across the organization, and take that time so people know about your department and the work we're doing. And then finally, guard your independence. One of the challenges I've had, and I've talked to many of you here over the last couple days, do you report into legal? Do you report? Are you an independent department? Do you have a hybrid program? It can work in many, many different type of structures. I completely believe that. I have a very respectful relationship with my general counsel. I'm fortunate that we have independent reporting. We both sit at the executive table and report independently to the CEO. I have to fight for that independence. We just had a new general counsel come in. And the first question was, why doesn't compliance report into me? And so it is an ongoing discussion that I have. Now that I have that independence, I work really hard to make sure it's not just me saying why I need to be at that executive table, but it's 4 or 5 other leaders to say, Jenny adds a lot to this team beyond compliance, and she needs to be at this executive table. We need our compliance officer at that table. And that is not an easy discussion, an easy battle to keep winning. But what I use are many of the resources that you all write about or blog about, or different articles, what Donna Bone, what she has put in many of the blogs that she has done, are things that I take back and keep in front of my organization as to why we need to have an independent compliance program. So just make sure that as it's all the little things that we do that help us be successful with the big things. And so don't underestimate the power of all the little things that you can do to keep yourself in front of your organizations and in that influencing, effective role for the organization. Roy, you want to talk a little bit? Isn't this kind of ironic? Roy's going to talk about humility. They didn't think that was that funny.
I know it happened once back in '67, and hopefully someday it'll happen again. Humility, when I was back at the University of Wisconsin as a compliance officer, this was 18 years ago. Compliance wasn't really a big thing. Compliance was really difficult in the physician environment. I'm sure everybody has their challenging folks, engineering or academics or other types of environments. Ours were the physicians who were tough cats to herd. And one of the things I did right away, and to this day I think it's a best practice that I get absolutely no agreement on, is I'm not of the belief that the compliance officer should chair the compliance committee. And I think a lot of people do. I think it's okay, it sure works that way, but I couldn't, my boss and I, my CEO, I couldn't go find someone else other than me fast enough to chair the compliance committee. We wanted that informal leader who we could help set agendas for and who would follow direction and had the courage to handle a few tough conversations for us. And it took a little humility. I mean, not only did we have Dr. Scott Springman chair the compliance committee, but when he and I went to the board to report on compliance, I prepped him to do most of the discussion. I think that there's 2 kinds of influence. The influence that you have and the influence that you can get others to have for you. Leveraging influence, there's hundreds of people that you can encourage department chairs to influence their employees to take education and tone at the top seriously. We really need, as compliance professionals, to leverage the influence of others. We don't need center stage. You were just talking about this a minute ago, Jenny, that you make people own the issues that are discovered. We use their influence and their time and their resources to get these problems fixed. It's not necessarily about being right. It's about being successful in your compliance program, being successful building an effective compliance program, when I was a compliance officer, I felt I wanted to succeed at all costs, even if at times it meant I had to take a back seat. And before I hand it off to Jenny, I've got a bug flying in my face. Before I hand it off to Jenny, I want to share a funny story. I came to the University of Wisconsin. I inherited a relatively big team. They were way ahead of the game. I told them that I don't care if we have to lie, cheat, or steal, we are going to implement an effective compliance program. Yeah, you think it's funny. I didn't quite get it. We had a dignitary show up at the University of Wisconsin Medical Foundation, and I introduced this dignitary to my team. And one of my team members says, "Roy says we can lie, cheat, and steal." And I tried to explain how that came about. So now from here on out, I wish that all of you could do everything but lie, cheat, and steal to implement an effective compliance program.
All right. Triple C. What does that mean? One of the things, we have calm, cool, collected. We are evaluated in our roles by what we do, what we say, how we look, and how we do things. And we are role models for the organization. We're the ones that are rolling out, the compliance training, and we talk about the values and the culture. And so our employees are watching us and our teams very, very closely. And so the reality is the bar is higher for us. And so as we look at how we conduct ourselves through the organization, some call it, for a compliance officer, having a measured approach. I like to call it poker face. That whatever issue comes down or comes into my office, that's another, I think, exciting part of our job. Every email, every phone call, you have no idea what's on the other side of the line and what's going to come through. We have these great work plans for 2014, and by the time you get, not even that far into it, something that wasn't even on the radar comes in, or some new regulation comes in that you didn't really expect would create that much work, or, it's always something unexpected that we have to be ready for. And one of the things that I really work with my team and myself is when things come in is to just be even keel, be calm, be cool, collected. Our organizations want that from us. There is so much going on across the organization. And you know what? We are not the only important department in the organization. I tell my team that a lot. Compliance is so important, and we need to do all these things. We have the regulators that are watching this and all these different things going on. And it's yes, yes, and yes. And there is a sense of urgency to almost every issue that comes across our desk. But at the same time, there are lots of urgent things going on in all the different departments of our organization. And so, for example, my relationship with our chief sales officer, we're just starting into our big selling season. 25,000 agents, brokers that we have to get certified, onboarded, that are going to go across the country, sell our products, and he has this unbelievable number he has to hit. And so I think my job is hard. I look at his job, and that's one thing. I look around the organization, and I think, I'm glad I don't have your job, and I'm glad I don't have your job. We all have really hard jobs within our organization. So one thing, I think at times compliance officers get a bit dramatic, and I hear it when I'm talking to them, like, and here's what I did, and then I have this much to do, and now my job has gotten this much bigger. And we have to be very careful about that, about making sure that we are, for our organization, I like to call it the voice of reason. And again, a compliment to say, Jenny, I'm so glad when you're at these meetings because you bring calmness to the meeting. You ask questions instead of jump to answers. And by the time the meeting ends, I feel better that we have a direction, a plan, and that things have calmed down a little bit. I have a sign in my office. Actually, there's two. One is right by my door that someone taped on it because I kept talking about stopping the swirl, and it's stop the swirl. It is our job within the organizations to stop the swirl. There's enough people that are going to be mixing things up and getting things all swirled up. And then it's our job, someone gave this to me, and everybody all the compliance officers on my team have this. It's the keep calm and carry on sign. And right as you walk into the office, and my CEO has said, I sometimes walk by your office just because I can see that sign when I walk by, and it makes me feel better as he's trying to process some issues. Our organizations look for us to turn complex things into simple things. They don't look for us to make it much more complicated and everyone think, wow, you have a really big, important job, and how hard is your job? How do you get that done? They want to see our job for the organization, the role we play to support our organization, to carry out their business goals, their business strategies. They want to see us come in and bring very complex situations and bring them to simple solutions. And not talk about how much more you have to do, but we've already accomplished this much, and if we just do this, we can get to where we're going. And so as we sit and think about how we reflect out to the rest of our organization, I like keeping that poker face idea, the triple C, the calm, cool, collected, and really being seen as a voice of reason for our organizations. So I think we're pretty much to the end. I guess a question I have been asked, and I ask my team is, so what's next? We've talked about influencing. We've talked about, these bubbles. There they are. As I said, I'm sure as people are sitting there, you think, well, I would name it this, or here's what I'd put under there. That's fantastic. That's what we hope you're doing. That's why I keep talking to people and figuring out different ways that I can learn more. Or for our personality style, Roy and I have very different personalities. We agree on influencing. How we are both attempt to be influential, we come at it in completely different paths and roads because, that's how we approach life is with very different types of personalities and areas we're comfortable moving in some directions and not comfortable doing others. But one of the things we're doing is putting together a resource page that we've started a collection of things that we've read as we've gone through our career, some things we've talked about with others. It is going to be on the website, and what we would like to do, and we're hoping you'll all do, is when you go to this page for a resource, to look at different resources and think of what might be helpful to you as you continue your journeys as well, is add to it. If you're finding good things out there, or you have different ideas of what has worked, we'd love to hear it, and we'd love to keep this as a conversation that just didn't happen today, but that's evolving. And just to end with, influencing isn't a one-time thing. We can't just influence when we want to get something done, or we want to influence someone, so then we decide, today I'm going to influence. Influence is something that we have to do and think about in each interaction, very intentional strategic communications of what we're doing, to look down the road to say, if I want to get to here, what are some of the steps that I need to be doing to build up to that at this time? So Roy, do you want to finish up with sharing a little bit in your role, what you've been seeing, how we're not just influencing as compliance officers within our organization, but outside of our organizations in the work through SCCE?
I will do that. By any chance, is the pig story trending on Twitter? This is good news. Bad news?
Okay, this is where I've been influential so far to not tell the pig story. So we'll see if I can make it the next couple minutes.
Good. Good news for the people tweeting.
It's
bad news for you two. I've been looking at this stuff for 18 years from the perspective of the profession. Where's the profession going? What do we need? How can we influence? It's like this meteorite, if you could go up to it and just give it a little push, 5 years later, it would be on a much different trajectory, even with the lightest push. It feels like that to me in this profession. But I can tell you after watching, we have because of the people in this room and the writing of articles and giving speeches, becoming members of the organization, supporting SCCE. SCCE gets a greater voice. We influence others. We are getting a stronger seat at the table. We are getting greater independence. We are making a difference. I granted nobody thinks it needs to go faster than I do. I am the world's most impatient person. And I want to leave you with if you could show me the time, I want to leave you with a couple of things that are a bit possibly of a stretch. One is SCCE has started to do conferences in Canada, Brazil, Switzerland, Europe, Belgium, China. We are beginning to help not just have a standard in the United States of the definition of a role of a compliance officer and the function of a compliance program, but we're out there sowing the seeds for a standard of those two things, much like audit has a standard, finance has a standard across the world. Other professions are beginning to develop standards across the world. I think it's an exciting time. It might be a little less stressful for me if I was the CEO of an association that had been around 100 years and everything was pretty much settled and we are now in maintenance mode. It wouldn't work for me. I'm too manic. But we are at an exciting time, and I want to, if you guys could show me the time on the screen down here, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You're good, Roy. We're good.
Okay. So here's the little bit of a stretch. And if you think about this as much as I do for as long as I have, you come up with these sort of things. If you think about what countries are successful, you think that certain countries are successful because they have a successful economy, and there are many reasons for that successful economy. Right now, I think it's becoming more clear that one of the reasons that economies are successful is because that country is trusted. People will put offices there, they will manufacture there, they will sell their products there because that country can be trusted. They have the rule of law. They will protect their intellectual property, their trademarks, their physical plants, their people. And I think you can look at some countries that don't have much rule of law or don't enforce it. And they struggle to build trust. And I think as a result, it affects their economy. So over time, we've developed the rule of law. We've built stronger enforcement. I think the next stage is this room. I think the next stage are these people. It's far more effective to find problems real time at the job site with the person that's about to make that decision than it is to do things and only years later have enforcement find out and then spend years beating people up to set an example so the rest of us stop it. The enforcement system and the regulations really are an incredibly ineffective system, you know. And again, I drink the Kool-Aid, but I think you people, this profession, this organization is the solution. I get real tired of all the people get on TV after some Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, and Health South, these things, and a lawyer gets up and says, yeah, they're all terrible, and they broke the law. Another lawyer gets in and says, oh, they're all innocent, and the government's overreaching. And then they get the ethicists to come in, and they set this that says, everybody's unethical. And it's just, I'm sorry, it's just not true. These are not the facts. This isn't the best approach. The people in this room are the best approach. The ultimate influence I think we have is to build a more trusted business environment in our country so that our country can be more effective in the global economy, build better workplaces, better places to work, and help everybody in society. I think it's one of the coolest jobs in the world, but then again, I am the most biased person on the planet Earth. We've really enjoyed this opportunity to do this, but because the pig story is now trending on Twitter, I'm going to have to tell the story.
That was only a little encouragement from this crowd. That's all I have to say. And be careful what you ask for.
It's all I need. So Adam, I don't know how much you've noticed. Adam's skill set is he's hired Adam a few years ago, and he's come on board, and he's killing it. He's fixing problems I didn't know I had. He's doing things I didn't hire him to do that are problems that I needed help with, that we all needed help with. And he's amazing at facilitating panels and these sorts of things. He turns out he's also a really nice guy. One day, Adam, while he was in college, he used to drive a Volkswagen Beetle. And he was driving down the road, and a pig truck raced by. And it cut him off and turned down a country road. And it was driving way too fast and tucked the corner too fast, and a pig fell out of the truck. And Adam, being the nice guy he is, he went out, scooped up the pig, and threw it in the back of his Beetle, and chased after the pig truck. And a cop pulled him over for speeding. And the cop says, "Where are you going in such a hurry, and why is this pig in the back seat?" Adam says, "Well, the pig fell out of the truck, and I'm trying to get it back to its rightful owner." The cop says, "You'll never catch up with that guy now. Why don't you slow down and take this pig to the zoo or something?" Adam said, "Great idea." About 3 hours later, Adam gets pulled over for speeding again by the same cop and the policeman. And the policeman says, "Where are you going in such a hurry again? And why is that pig still in the back seat? I thought I told you to take him to the zoo or something." Adam says, "I did, and we had such a good time. We're going out for dinner." Thank you very much.